Giant alien widow demands human husband for powerful offspring, but her secret changes everything. Eric Donovan wiped his brow as sweat dripped down his face. His hands were covered in oil, his jumpsuit stained from days of hard labor. He had been working on this water purifier for 3 days straight, trying to get it to work again. The small human settlement on the war-torn planet had little in the way of resources, and without clean water, they would be in serious trouble. The purifier was a lifeline, and Eric had to make sure it was fixed, no matter how much it drained him. After tightening the last bolt, he stepped back, wiping his dirty hands on his already filthy jumpsuit. That should do it, he muttered to himself, standing up straight. He wiped his eyes and stretched his aching back, letting out a long breath of relief. This was the last thing he wanted to be doing, but it was his job. Eric had been stuck on this godforsaken planet for almost 4 years. What was supposed to be a 6-month contract maintaining mining equipment had turned into an indefinite stay when the Antaran Civil War broke out. The spaceport had been destroyed in the first week of fighting, and with it, any chance of returning to Earth. The war had trapped him here, far from home, in a place that had become more of a prison than anything else. The settlement was small, barely 200 humans remaining. Most were engineers, miners, or diplomats caught in the crossfire of alien politics. And Eric? Well, he was a mechanic, just another cog in the machine, fixing things so the rest could survive. But the people here were resilient, and so was he. They had to be. As he stepped out of his workshop and squinted into the harsh sunlight, Eric couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. This wasn't where he had imagined he'd end up. A human outpost on a hostile alien planet, surviving on scraps and makeshift repairs. There was no beauty here, no wonder. Only dust, sweat, and the constant hum of a war that seemed to have no end. He sat down on an old crate just outside the workshop, reaching for his canteen. The water was lukewarm, tainted with the taste of minerals and chemicals, but it was better than nothing. He closed his eyes for a moment, just trying to steal a few seconds of peace in a place that never seemed to allow it. Human. The voice was deep, unmistakably female. Eric's eyes snapped open, heart pounding in his chest. He knew that voice. He looked up and froze. Standing before him was the tallest woman he had ever seen. No, not a woman, an alien. She towered at least 7 feet tall, her athletic body radiating power and grace. Her skin was a smooth, light blue, and her muscles were defined, visible beneath her battle-worn black armor. Her face was angular, with high cheekbones and piercing eyes the color of ice, as if they could see straight through him. Eric scrambled to his feet, the wrench still in his hand. The last thing he needed was trouble. But trouble had just walked into his life, and it wasn't going to leave anytime soon. The alien woman didn't move, her eyes locked onto him with a look that seemed to study every part of his being. Eric could feel his heart race. He recognized her species immediately. She was Antarion, one of the dominant species on the planet. But not just any Antarion. The markings on her armor identified her as a member of the Northern Clans, a fierce and aggressive faction in the ongoing civil war. "Can I help you?" Eric managed, his voice rough as his mind raced to process what was happening. The wrench still gripped tightly in his hand, though he knew it wouldn't do him any good against someone like her. The alien woman's lips curved upward in what could only be described as a smirk. "I am Taria, widow of Warlord Krendak of the Northern Reaches," she said, her voice deep and commanding. It carried the unmistakable tone of someone used to giving orders, not receiving them. "You are the human called Eric, the one who fixes machines." It wasn't a question. Eric's brow furrowed in confusion. "How do you know my name?" he asked, his eyes narrowing. But Taria didn't answer. Instead, she took a step closer, and Eric had to fight the instinct to step back. There was something about her presence, a kind of power, that was impossible to ignore. Taria's eyes scanned him, studying him with an intensity that made him feel exposed, like every flaw was laid bare before her. "I have observed you for some time," she said. "You are strong for a human, resourceful, intelligent." Eric didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't exactly a compliment, but it wasn't an insult either. "Thank you," he replied, though he couldn't hide the confusion in his voice. He had no idea where this was going. Taria took another step closer, and now Eric could smell her, something sweet and unfamiliar, like cinnamon and ozone. The scent made his skin prickle, though he wasn't sure why. I need a husband, Taria said bluntly. And you need strong offspring. Eric blinked, certain he had misheard. What? I need a mate, Taria continued, her voice as calm and direct as ever. My scouts have observed your settlement. You struggle for resources, protection, and purpose. I can provide these things. Eric's mind spun. What was she talking about? A mate? He wasn't interested in whatever this was. Look, he began, his voice carefully neutral. I appreciate the offer, but humans and Antarians don't exactly. I mean, we're not even the same species. Taria's expression remained unchanged. Our genetic structures are compatible. This has been confirmed by our scientists, she said, as if the matter were settled. The children would be strong. Eric shook his head, trying to process this absurd proposition. He wasn't even sure where to begin. This is very sudden. I don't even know you. You will learn, Taria replied simply. With that, she turned and began to walk away, her powerful frame silhouetted against the setting suns. Before she disappeared over the ridge, she paused and glanced back at Eric. Consider carefully, human, she said, her voice carrying a weight of finality. Such opportunities come rarely in times of war. Eric stood there, frozen, watching her go. His heart was still racing, and his mind was filled with questions. What had just happened? Had he just been proposed to by an alien warlord? He sank back onto the crate, staring at the empty space where she had been, the sound of his own breath the only thing filling the silence. This wasn't what he had signed up for. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eric couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't even imagine. Eric spent the next few hours in a daze, walking through the settlement like a man who had just stepped out of a dream. Taria's words echoed in his mind. I need a husband, and you need strong offspring. It made no sense. He had lived here for nearly 4 years, fixing machines, maintaining equipment, and surviving in this alien wasteland. The thought of becoming some kind of political pawn was the furthest thing from his mind. Yet, there it was, an offer he couldn't ignore. The sun had long since set, but the lights of the settlement flickered, casting long shadows across the makeshift buildings. Eric walked through the narrow streets, his thoughts a whirlwind. His mind kept returning to Taria, to her strength, her confidence, and her absolute certainty in her proposition. There had been no hint of hesitation, no room for negotiation. It was as if she had already decided that he was the answer to something much bigger than either of them. But there was one thing Eric knew for sure. He needed more information before making any kind of decision. He couldn't just take her at face value. His first stop was Mika's trading post. The older man, with his weathered face and gruff demeanor, had seen everything. If anyone knew the truth about Taria and her northern clan, it was Mika. As Eric entered, the bell above the door gave a faint jingle, and the old man looked up from behind the counter. Mika's eyes twinkled with the familiar curiosity of someone who never missed a bit of gossip. Well, Mika said, a grin tugging at his lips. Look who's back. Heard you had an interesting visitor today. Eric sighed, rubbing his face with one hand. That's putting it lightly, he muttered. Mika raised an eyebrow. She offered you something, didn't she? More like demanded it, Eric replied, leaning against the counter. She wants me to marry her. His voice trailed off as if even he couldn't quite believe the words. And I'm supposed to father strong offspring for her. No strings attached. Just children. The grin faded from Mika's face, replaced by a more serious look. Ah, that explains it. Eric's curiosity piqued. Explains what? Mika leaned forward, lowering his voice. You've met Taria, haven't you? The widow of Krendak, the warlord of the northern reaches. Eric nodded slowly. Yeah, she said she was his widow. His tone was still skeptical. But what does that have to do with this? Mika took a slow sip from his mug before continuing. Taria is a powerful woman, Eric. Or, well, alien, if you want to be precise. She commands the northern clans, and after her husband's death, she inherited his title, his land, and all of his holdings. But there's a catch. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. What kind of catch? She's a widow, Mika said grimly. And her people, her warriors, will only accept her as their leader if she remarries. She needs a mate to solidify her position, to ensure her claim to the clan's power. But here's the twist. She can't just marry any Antarian. That would create a power imbalance. She needs someone outside the clan, someone who won't threaten the hierarchy. A human, for instance. Mika raised an eyebrow as he finished his explanation. Eric's head spun as he absorbed the information. So, she's looking for a human to marry because it won't upset the political structure of her clan? Exactly, Mika replied. You're not just a mate for her, Eric. You're a symbol. A political move. That's why she picked you. You're strong, you're resourceful, and you're neutral. You won't have any claim to power, and you won't pose a threat to the clan's leadership. Eric's mind raced. And you think she's serious about this? She's deadly serious, Mika said, his voice grave. This isn't just some random offer, Eric. This is her future, and the future of the entire clan. The northern reaches are a volatile place, and if she doesn't secure her position quickly, her enemies will see it as a weakness. Eric leaned back against the counter, his hands in his pockets. The whole thing felt more like a trap than an opportunity. He had no interest in politics, and he wasn't about to get caught up in some alien clan war. But there was something about the way Taria spoke to him, the raw power in her presence, that made it hard to dismiss her entirely. Is there anything else I should know? Eric asked, suddenly feeling the weight of the situation settling in. Mika scratched his beard thoughtfully. Well, there's one other thing. Taria's clan is divided. There's a faction led by her late husband's brother, Vrock, who wants to take control of the clan. He's dangerous, ruthless, and he won't let her keep the leadership without a fight. Marrying her won't just be a political move. It's a war in itself. Eric's stomach churned. So, it's not just about having children. It's about surviving a political coup. Mika nodded. Exactly. And you, my friend, are right in the middle of it. Whether you like it or not, you've got a target on your back now. Eric let out a deep breath. This was more than just a marriage proposal. It was a fight for survival. For both Taria and himself. But something inside him stirred. It wasn't just the political intrigue or the promise of food and shelter that made him reconsider. It was Taria herself. Despite the harshness of her proposition, there was something compelling about her, a force that could not be ignored. Okay, Eric said, his voice steady, though his mind was still reeling. I need to know more. I need to understand what I'm walking into before I make any decisions. Mika smiled knowingly. That's the right approach, Eric. But remember, time is short. The longer you wait, the more dangerous this gets. Vrock's faction isn't just going to sit back and let Taria solidify her position. They'll make a move soon. And when they do, it'll be too late to back out. Eric nodded, his decision made. He had to find out more about Taria, about her clan, and about the enemies she faced. The road ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. Eric Donovan was no longer just a mechanic in a small settlement. He was about to become a key player in a war that could change everything. As he left Mika's shop, the weight of his decision hung heavy in the air. The sun was setting, but there was no peace in the sky tonight. It was the calm before a storm, and Eric had a feeling that this was only the beginning. Eric couldn't sleep that night. The stillness of the settlement felt foreign, almost suffocating, as though the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something monumental to happen. He tossed and turned in his cot, the sheets tangled around his legs, his mind racing with thoughts of Taria, her words, and the world she had brought him into. It was absurd. Everything about it seemed insane, but in the quiet of the night, with only the distant hum of machinery and the occasional murmur of voices from the neighboring shelters, it felt like it was the only option left. His heart was torn between the familiar dread of staying in this lifeless wasteland and the terrifying unknown of stepping into the chaos of Taria's world. He wasn't a warrior. He wasn't a leader. He was just a man trying to survive, trying to fix things and get by. But somehow, now, he was caught in a game far larger than anything he had ever signed up for. As dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange, Eric decided he could no longer wait. His decision had been made. He would find answers, and if he was going to step into this strange world with Taria, he needed to know what he was truly getting into. The night had given him clarity. He couldn't back out now. There was too much at stake, and the only way forward was to face it head-on. Eric made his way to the trading post again, knowing Mika would be his best source of information. This time, the older man was more subdued, a knowing look in his eyes as he watched Eric approach. So, you've made up your mind, eh? Mika said, looking up from a crate of supplies. Eric nodded, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline in his veins. I need to know more. About Taria, her clan, everything. If I'm going to do this, I need to understand the stakes. Mika motioned for him to sit, and Eric did, the weight of the decision settling in his chest like a stone. You're a smart man, Mika said after a long silence, his voice lower than usual. And you've got guts. But you need to understand something important, something Taria won't tell you. Eric leaned in, his curiosity piqued. What's that? The northern clans are in turmoil, Mika began. Taria's power is built on the ashes of her husband's legacy, but it's fragile. Her position is shaky at best. You see, when Krendak died, the clan fractured. Taria inherited everything, but her late husband's brother, Vrak, has other plans. He's ruthless, manipulative, and he's not going to sit idly by while a human, of all people, steps into the role of leader's consort. Eric furrowed his brow. So, this isn't just a matter of having kids and keeping the peace. There's a real danger here. Exactly, Mika replied. Vrak sees Taria's new marriage as a threat, not just to his claim, but to the entire structure of the clan. That's why she's so determined to have a human mate. She needs someone who isn't a threat politically, someone who can't challenge her authority. You, Eric, are a tool in a much bigger game. Eric's stomach tightened. It was one thing to marry an alien for political reasons, but now it felt like his very survival was at risk. His role wasn't just about having children. He was a potential pawn in a deadly power struggle. Mika continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. And if Vrak succeeds, it's not just Taria who will be in danger. It's you too. You'll be caught in the middle of a war you never asked for. A war that could tear apart everything you've come to know about this world. Eric sat back, his mind spinning. He had thought he was simply walking into a strange but straightforward situation, but now it seemed like a maze of treachery, power games, and hidden dangers. The stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. I need to think, Eric muttered, standing up abruptly. His head was pounding, and his body felt as if it were moving on autopilot. He had never been a man of politics, nor had he ever cared for power plays. But this was different. This wasn't just about surviving another day. It was about choosing which world he would fight for, if he chose to fight at all. Mika didn't try to stop him as he walked toward the door. Instead, he just gave him a nod, as though he knew Eric was already making up his mind. Eric spent the rest of the day walking around the settlement, trying to clear his head. He stopped by the water station, the makeshift market, and the old mining equipment that had become their lifeblood. Everywhere he went, he saw the same thing. Tired, desperate faces trying to make do with the little they had. They weren't just surviving. They were waiting for something to change. As he sat on the edge of a cracked metal crate by the edge of the settlement, Eric realized the truth. He couldn't stay here forever. Taria might be asking him to take on a role he wasn't prepared for, but she was right about one thing. This was an opportunity. An opportunity to do something beyond fixing broken machinery and living in a place that felt like a dying ghost town. If he wanted change, he had to make it happen himself. His mind flashed to Taria, the way she had looked at him, that raw intensity in her gaze. It wasn't just about the power she wanted to maintain. There was something more in her eyes, something that made Eric feel like she was just as trapped as he was. Maybe, just maybe, they were both fighting for the same thing. The decision was clear. He couldn't back down now. He was going to face whatever came next, for better or worse. He didn't know what it would cost him, but the only way forward was to take Taria's proposal seriously. If he was going to play this game, he would need to be more than just a survivor. He would need to become a player. By sunset, Eric was back at his workshop, gathering his things. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he was ready. The human settlement was quiet behind him, the evening stars starting to twinkle in the vast alien sky. His future, whatever it looked like, was waiting for him, and it was time to face it. As he closed the door behind him, one thought ran through his mind. If I'm going to do this, I have to do it on my terms. The next morning, Eric stood at the edge of the settlement, his heart racing. It felt like everything was shifting beneath him. What had started as a routine day in a routine life had become something else entirely. There was no turning back now. Taria had made it clear. If he was to join her in her territory, it would be a journey he would never forget. But this wasn't just about the physical distance he would travel. It was about stepping into a new world entirely, one that was far removed from the makeshift shelters and broken machinery of the human settlement. When Taria arrived, the air seemed to grow heavier. She was accompanied by 4 massive Antarion warriors, each riding a strange 6-legged mount that looked like a cross between a horse and a rhinoceros. Their movements were graceful, powerful, and utterly alien. Their thick armor gleamed in the morning light, each warrior as imposing as the next. Taria was at the head of the group, her presence undeniable. Her eyes met Eric's with a look that told him she was ready, and he wasn't sure whether to be terrified or exhilarated. As she extended her hand to him, it was not an invitation. It was an order, the kind only a leader would give. Without speaking, Taria pulled Eric onto her mount. It was an awkward, unfamiliar motion, but the heat from her body was undeniable. She was so much stronger than him, her armor pressing against him as she guided the beast forward. He wrapped his arms around her waist instinctively, suddenly aware of every detail. The firmness of her muscles beneath the armor, the scent of her skin, the sharpness of her movements. There was no escaping the fact that this woman, this alien, was both his protector and his leader. "Hold tight," she commanded, her voice low, almost like a growl. The ride was nothing like he had ever experienced. The ground beneath them was rocky, uneven, and unforgiving, yet the mount moved with an agility that seemed impossible for such a large creature. The wind whipped through the air, and Eric clung to Taria's back, trying to steady himself, though he could barely focus on anything except the speed and power with which they moved. As they rode, the landscape began to change. The barren wastelands surrounding the human settlement gave way to a different kind of terrain: lush valleys, expansive fields, and high cliffs that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. For the first time since he had arrived on this planet, Eric felt the weight of the war that had consumed everything. This was no longer a survival story. It was a story of power, of strength, and of something much greater than he had ever imagined. They rode for hours, crossing rough terrain and stopping only briefly for water and rest. By the time they reached the ridge that overlooked Taria's territory, Eric's body was aching from the hours of riding. But what he saw before him took his breath away. Taria's compound was nestled in a fertile valley, completely unlike the wasteland that surrounded the human settlement. There were lush green fields stretching as far as the eye could see, with flowing rivers and groves of strange trees. The air smelled fresh, clean, almost like earth, but with an alien tang that made it unmistakably different. The compound itself was impressive. Unlike the makeshift shelters Eric was used to, these buildings were made of stone and metal, constructed with an eye for both defense and status. There was an air of permanence about it, of power. It was clear that this was no ordinary place. This was the heart of Taria's clan, a place built for strength, not survival. As they approached, Eric couldn't help but feel the weight of the eyes upon him. The Antarion warriors had already begun to look at him differently, and it wasn't just curiosity. There was a sense of expectation in the air. He was no longer just a human mechanic. He was a potential leader, a political pawn, and perhaps something more. But what that more was, he didn't yet understand. Taria didn't give him much time to think. She dismounted from the creature with ease and turned to Eric. "Follow me," she said, her voice unwavering. The warriors that had accompanied her dismounted as well, walking with a military precision that sent a chill down Eric's spine. They were not just soldiers. They were part of Taria's power, part of the foundation upon which her rule rested. As they moved through the compound, Eric couldn't help but be struck by the differences between this place and the human settlement he had called home. There was order here, but not the chaotic kind Eric was used to. Everything seemed calculated, every movement deliberate. They passed groups of Antarion workers tending to the fields, soldiers practicing combat drills, and what appeared to be a group of children playing near the water. Despite the air of tension, there was a sense of unity here, a sense of purpose that was entirely absent from the human settlement. Taria led him to a large stone building in the center of the compound. It was the largest structure Eric had seen so far, with high walls adorned with strange symbols and carvings. As they approached, 2 warriors standing guard opened the doors without question. Inside, the atmosphere was just as imposing. The walls were lined with weapons, trophies from past battles, and various artifacts that spoke to the power and prestige of the northern clans. At the center of the room was a massive stone throne, clearly meant for someone of great importance. Taria walked to it, her steps measured and confident. "This is where I lead my people," Taria said, her voice softening slightly, though still filled with authority. "And soon, it will be where you lead them as well." Eric didn't know what to say. He had been expecting a cold reception, but this was different. This wasn't just about politics or survival. There was something else here, something personal. Taria wasn't just a warlord. She was a woman who had fought to protect her people, who had earned her place at the top. But Eric couldn't help but feel like an outsider in this world. Everything here was alien to him. The customs, the power structures, even the way the Antarion warriors moved. He had been brought here under the guise of a political marriage, but the more he saw, the more he realized that his role was going to be much more complicated than he ever anticipated. Taria turned to face him. Her eyes were sharp, yet there was something softer behind them, something that hinted at a side of her he hadn't seen before. "You are not just here to be my consort," she said quietly. "You are here because you have the strength to stand beside me. And together, we will ensure the survival of my people." Eric met her gaze, feeling the weight of her words. This wasn't just about a political alliance anymore. It was about the future of two species, two worlds, and perhaps a future he had never even imagined. As the door behind them closed with a soft thud, Eric realized that he had stepped into a world where power, politics, and survival weren't just about strength. They were about something deeper, something far more complicated. And in that moment, he understood that the true battle was just beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of unfamiliar routines. Taria's territory was vast, and every corner seemed to hold something new and strange to Eric. The compound itself was a fortress of stone and metal, built to withstand both the elements and any threats that might arise. But it wasn't just the walls that felt imposing, it was the people. The Antarion warriors, each one a towering figure of strength and resolve, seemed to watch him with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. They had all been raised in a culture where power meant survival, and power meant respect. And Eric, with his smaller, human frame, was not exactly what they were used to. Taria seemed to sense his discomfort, but she didn't offer much comfort. She wasn't the type to coddle anyone. Instead, she threw him into the thick of things. The first test came early in the morning when she led him to the training grounds. "Today, you will prove your worth," Taria said, her voice devoid of emotion as she walked alongside him. "The warriors here are your new family, Eric. They will not follow someone they think is weak." Eric didn't respond. He knew what she meant. The warlords of the northern clans didn't care about diplomacy or kindness. Strength was the only thing that earned respect. And right now, he was the weakest link in the chain. They arrived at the training grounds, a wide open space surrounded by high walls. The ground was covered in soft dirt, and a small group of warriors were already sparring, their movements fast and precise. Eric was suddenly acutely aware of how out of place he felt in his worn human clothing. His hands itched, and he briefly considered how ridiculous he must look to them. Taria gestured toward one of the sparring warriors, a massive Antarion male with muscles rippling beneath his dark armor. "Dren," she called, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Step forward." The human wishes to prove himself. Dren turned his gaze toward them, his eyes narrowing as he took in Eric's smaller frame. The challenge was clear. In his eyes, Eric was nothing more than a distraction, a weakling who didn't belong. Eric took a step forward, his heart pounding. He wasn't a warrior. He didn't have the years of combat experience these people did. But he had something they didn't: adaptability. He had lived his entire life figuring out how to survive, how to make do with less, how to use his mind instead of his strength. "Let's get this over with," Dren sneered, cracking his knuckles and readying his stance. Eric, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on him, raised his hands in defense. His first instinct was to try to move fast, to avoid Dren's strength, but he realized that might only make things worse. He needed to outsmart the guy, not overpower him. Dren lunged forward, his speed betraying his size. Eric barely dodged, but the attack wasn't what he had expected. Instead of landing a blow, Dren quickly shifted his stance and swung his massive fist toward Eric's head. It was a feint, a trick designed to throw him off guard. Eric saw it coming and sidestepped just in time, but the air was thick with the weight of Dren's momentum. The ground beneath them trembled as the giant warrior recovered quickly and came at him again. For a split second, Eric hesitated, his mind racing to keep up with the speed of the fight. He wasn't built for this kind of combat. But then it clicked. He remembered something from his training back home, about using an opponent's momentum against them. He had trained with machinery, with tools, but he had also spent years learning how to move quickly, how to improvise. He could do this. As Dren swung again, Eric didn't dodge. Instead, he moved inside the strike, grabbing Dren's wrist and using his own smaller body to pivot, throwing Dren off balance. The giant warrior stumbled, his feet sliding across the dirt. Eric didn't waste a moment. He kicked Dren's legs out from under him, sending the warrior crashing to the ground with a loud thud. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the sound of warriors murmuring filled the air. Eric stood over Dren, breathing heavily, his heart racing. He had done it. He had used the one thing he had, the ability to think and adapt, to beat an opponent far stronger than him. Taria's voice broke through the quiet. "Well done, human," she said, her tone as neutral as ever. "You have passed your first test." Dren grunted as he picked himself up from the ground, brushing off the dirt. His expression was one of grudging respect. "You've got tricks, I'll give you that." Eric offered him a nod, not sure what else to say. He wasn't here to make friends, but he had earned this moment. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Taria approached, her gaze fixed on Eric. "You have potential," she said, her words measured. But there was something in her eyes now, something different. Perhaps even a hint of approval. But one victory does not make you a leader. Prove yourself every day, or you will be forgotten. Eric nodded, but he didn't reply. He understood what she meant. This was only the beginning, and the road ahead would be full of more tests. As the day wore on, Taria continued to push him. She didn't let up. There were more combat drills, more challenges, more physical tests designed to wear him down. But it wasn't just his body that was tested, it was his mind. The warriors of the northern clans didn't fight blindly. Every move was calculated, and every strategy mattered. Taria's lessons weren't just about how to swing a weapon. They were about how to think like an Antarian, how to outsmart your opponent and never show weakness. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Eric's body ached. His muscles were sore, his hands raw from gripping weapons he wasn't used to. But something had shifted inside him. For the first time, he felt like he was no longer just surviving. He was becoming part of something bigger. That night, as he sat alone in his quarters, bruised and exhausted, he reflected on the day's events. Taria had pushed him to his limits, and though it had been difficult, he understood why. She wasn't just testing his strength. She was testing his resolve. And for the first time since he had landed on this planet, Eric realized that he was no longer a mere mechanic in a broken settlement. He was part of the northern clans now. Whether he liked it or not, he had been thrust into the heart of something much larger than himself. And he wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not ever. The days that followed were filled with training, strategy, and subtle observations. Eric had begun to understand the full scope of what he had walked into. The clan was not just a group of warriors. It was a complex web of politics, loyalty, and age-old traditions. And as much as he wanted to believe that his role here was as simple as being Taria's consort, the reality was much more complicated. Despite his earlier success in the training grounds, Eric had learned one important thing. In the northern clans, respect was earned through action, not words. He wasn't just a symbol of Taria's rule anymore. He was becoming a key player in the fight for control of this vast territory. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, Taria summoned him to her private chambers. Eric had grown used to the formality of their interactions, but tonight felt different. There was an undercurrent of tension in the air, and the urgency in Taria's voice made his heart race. When he arrived, she was standing near a large stone table, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the surface. Her armor, which she usually wore with pride, was set aside, and she looked more human than he had ever seen her, vulnerable, yet powerful. "Sit," she ordered, her voice colder than usual. Eric complied, sitting down across from her. "What's going on?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual, though he could sense the gravity in her demeanor. "I've learned something," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Something that could change everything." Eric's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" Taria took a deep breath before speaking. "Vrock is planning to move against me sooner than I expected. He's not just content to sit back and wait for my weakness. He's making a move to take the leadership of the northern clans, directly. And he's not alone. Eric's stomach sank. He had suspected this was coming, but hearing it from her confirmed his worst fears. Vrock, the treacherous brother of Taria's late husband, was no mere rival. He was a threat, and not just to Taria's rule, but to everything she had built. "You're not just fighting for your position anymore, Taria," Eric said, his voice low. "You're fighting for your life." She nodded, the weight of the truth settling heavily between them. "And yours, too," she added, her gaze softening slightly. "If Vrock takes control, it won't just be the clan that suffers. It'll be all of us." Eric was quiet for a moment, trying to process what she was saying. He had never asked for any of this, but he couldn't deny the responsibility now. Taria was right. He was in this whether he liked it or not. And the more he thought about it, the more he realized there was no turning back. The future of the northern clans, and his future, was at stake. "I can't let him win," Taria said suddenly, her voice resolute. "I won't let him tear this clan apart. But I need you, Eric. I need you to help me prepare for what's coming. Vrock is a warrior. He's powerful, and his followers are loyal. But we have something he doesn't: unity." Eric stood up, his mind racing. "You've got me. Whatever you need. We'll find a way to beat him." Taria's gaze softened for a moment, but her face quickly returned to its usual stern expression. "Don't mistake my need for support as weakness, Eric," she warned. "I need strength, and I need strategy. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for your mind, your ingenuity." Eric nodded, understanding the weight of her words. He wasn't just a pawn in this game. He was a critical piece of the puzzle. The realization hit him with full force. He would have to do more than just survive. He would have to fight, think, and outsmart their enemies if they were going to make it through. The next few days were a whirlwind. Taria's leadership was tested as rumors of Vrock's movements spread like wildfire throughout the compound. Eric found himself at the heart of the strategy meetings, planning defenses, reinforcing the borders, and even aiding in the development of new weapons. The clan's warriors were powerful, but they lacked the strategic thinking Eric had brought with him from Earth. And in this fight, brains were just as important as brawn. He worked tirelessly, poring over maps of the territory, reinforcing weak points in their defenses, and offering solutions to problems that had plagued the clan for years. But it wasn't just the physical threats that he had to worry about. The real danger lay in the betrayal that ran like a thread through the clan's inner circle. Late one night, as Eric worked late into the evening, a quiet knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, a familiar figure stepped inside. "Ka, Taria's most trusted warrior." "You're still up?" Ka asked, his deep voice betraying a hint of amusement. Eric rubbed his eyes, not surprised to see him. "I can't sleep. There's too much on the line." Ka stepped further into the room, his expression unreadable. "Taria's counting on you," he said quietly. "We all are." Eric looked up at Ka, sensing the unspoken weight of the words. "I'm doing my best, but I'm starting to think that we're not just fighting for power. We're fighting for something bigger than that. If Vrock wins, he'll tear apart everything we've built, everything she's built." Ka's gaze hardened. "Exactly. And that's why you're here. You're not just a partner in her plan. You're the one who can help her change the future of the clan. I can see it in your eyes. You're not like the others. You're smart." Eric didn't know how to respond to that, but Ka's words lingered in his mind long after he had left. Maybe it was true. Maybe he wasn't just the outsider anymore. Maybe he had earned his place here, not just as a mate, but as someone who could change the very course of the Northern clan's future. The next day, Taria called a council meeting. The tension in the room was palpable. She stood at the head of the table, surrounded by her most trusted advisors and warriors. Eric sat beside her, the only human among them, but somehow he didn't feel like an outsider anymore. He had proven himself in battle, and now he was proving himself in the court of strategy. "We know Vrock is preparing to strike," Taria began, her voice strong and commanding. "He has support from the Eastern clan, but we have something he doesn't: our unity." She turned to Eric, giving him a small but meaningful nod. "We'll use his arrogance against him. We'll set traps, weaken his forces, and make him think he has the upper hand. And when he finally makes his move, when he comes for us, we'll be ready." Eric's heart raced as he looked around the room at the warriors, the leaders, the people who depended on Taria's strength. They were counting on him now, not just as a husband, not just as a consort, but as a strategist, someone who could help lead them through the storm that was coming. And for the first time since he had stepped onto this alien world, Eric felt the weight of the responsibility settle firmly on his shoulders. He was no longer just fighting to survive. He was fighting for a future, and that fight had only just begun. The day had come. The tension that had built over the last few weeks had reached its breaking point. Vrock, the dangerous and power-hungry brother of Taria's late husband, was making his move. Every warrior in the compound was prepared, the weapons sharp and the defenses strong. Taria had done everything in her power to prepare, but there was no denying the truth. The battle ahead would determine everything. The future of the northern clans, her rule, and even Eric's place in this world hinged on what would unfold in the coming hours. Eric stood at the edge of the compound, his hands clenched into fists as he watched the horizon. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the land, but the feeling in the air was anything but peaceful. The winds whispered like the heralds of war. He was standing at the crossroads of history, his history, the history of his people, and the future of the Antarians. He wasn't just an observer now. He was part of this fight, and for better or worse, the path ahead would be shaped by his choices. Taria had been unwavering in her confidence. She trusted him, and she had placed him at her side. It was clear now that what had begun as a pragmatic arrangement, an alliance between two species, had evolved into something far deeper, far more profound. He had gained her respect, but more than that, he had gained her trust. And she, in turn, had shown him a side of herself that Eric hadn't expected. Taria was not just the cold, calculating leader of the northern clans. She was a woman, a warrior, and a mother. She had fought for her people, for her land, and for her place in a world that had never quite accepted her. Through their shared battles, Eric had come to understand that their fight wasn't just for power. It was for something much more important, survival. As the morning sun crept higher into the sky, the first signs of Vrock's forces appeared on the horizon. The ground shook beneath the massive war machines, their engines roaring as they tore through the plains. The enemy was coming. Taria stood beside Eric, her posture regal, her face a mask of determination. "It begins now," she said, her voice low but filled with conviction. She wasn't just the leader of the northern clans. She was their last hope. Eric's heart beat faster. He could hear the sounds of movement from the warriors gathering around him. The war was about to start. It was time for action, time for strategy. There was no more room for hesitation. In the days leading up to this moment, Eric had poured everything he had into preparing for this battle. He had analyzed every angle, every possible scenario. He had strengthened the defenses, devised strategies, and worked tirelessly to ensure the compound would hold against the oncoming storm. The traps were set. The warriors were ready. But there was one thing Eric knew for certain. The greatest strength they had was their unity. Taria's voice cut through the chaos of preparation. "We fight for our future today. For our children. For our legacy. We fight as one." She turned to Eric, and for a brief moment, he saw something softer in her eyes. Something that spoke of gratitude, but also of deep, unspoken understanding. They had come a long way since that first, strange encounter. And now, together, they would fight for everything they had built. Eric nodded, his heart steady, his mind sharp. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for her, for their child, and for the future they could create together. A future that would blend both human ingenuity and Antarian strength. Two worlds that had never before coexisted in such harmony. The first shots rang out in the distance. The battle had begun. The warriors of the Eastern clan, led by Vrock, had arrived, their forces pushing forward with overwhelming strength. But they had underestimated one thing, the unity of the northern clans. Eric stood at the center of the action, coordinating the defenses with the efficiency and precision that had become his trademark. His mind raced as he directed the warriors, guiding them through each phase of the battle. He was no longer the outsider. He was an integral part of this fight, his quick thinking and resourcefulness making a tangible difference. The human approach, thinking on his feet, adapting to every situation, was just what the northern clans needed. As the hours passed, the battle raged on. The sky darkened with smoke and the sound of clashing weapons filled the air. Eric's arms ached from the effort, his body battered from the continuous strain, but there was no time to rest. He had made a vow, to himself, to Taria, and to the people who had placed their faith in him. that he would not fail them. It wasn't just about the fight on the battlefield. It was about the fight for survival. The fight for a new kind of future. A future where humans and Antarians could stand together, united by their differences, instead of torn apart by them. As the battle reached its peak, Eric found himself face to face with Vrock, the man who had once been Taria's brother-in-law, and now stood as the embodiment of everything she had fought against. Vrock was a beast of a warrior, towering over Eric, his face twisted with hatred and rage. "You think you can stop me, human?" Vrock sneered, his massive sword raised high. "You're nothing but a pawn, a tool. You're weak. You'll never survive this." Eric's breath came fast as he faced the enemy that had come so close to destroying everything. Vrock swung his weapon down, but Eric sidestepped, using the momentum of the strike to throw the giant warrior off balance. "You're wrong," Eric said through gritted teeth. "I'm not a pawn. I'm not weak. I fight for something worth protecting." With a swift move, Eric disarmed Vrock, sending his sword flying through the air. The massive warrior fell to the ground, his face a mask of disbelief. "Yield," Eric commanded, his voice calm but filled with the strength of everything he had fought for. For a moment, there was silence. Then, with a growl of frustration, Vrock slapped his hand against the ground, the sign of submission in Antarian culture. The battle was over. As the dust settled, the warriors of the eastern clan began to retreat, their will broken. The northern clans had won. Taria had kept her leadership, and the threat of Vrock's faction had been crushed. Taria approached Eric, her eyes full of pride and something deeper. As she stood before him, the weight of their shared struggle, the victories and losses, settled in the air between them. "You did it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We did it." Eric looked around at the warriors who had fought beside them. There was respect in their eyes now, not just for Taria, but for him, too. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged. Not as an outsider, not as a pawn, but as a partner, a leader, and a man who had earned his place in this world. "We did," Eric agreed, his voice steady. As the stars began to twinkle above, the clan gathered to celebrate their victory. The bond between Eric and Taria had been forged in the fires of war, and now it was stronger than ever. Their child, the first of its kind, a hybrid of two worlds, would be born into a world of unity and hope, where differences were no longer a reason for division. Taria leaned close to Eric, her hand resting gently on his chest, over the small swell of her abdomen. "What do we call him?" Eric asked softly, the future stretching out before them. Taria smiled, her eyes softening with tenderness. "Krenna David." Eric's heart swelled as he gazed at her, at the child they had created together. "A name from both worlds," he said quietly. "A bridge between them," Taria replied, her voice filled with warmth. "The beginning of something new." And as they stood together, surrounded by the people who had fought with them, Eric knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The future had been secured, and together, they would build it from the ground up.